Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I'm Angelia, and today it's time for Friday Reads. So, this week I did finish 2 books. I DNF'd a book, get to that in a minute, and then I started a book for the weekend. We were on a road trip this week, and I didn't really have the kind of reading time I usually do. It was really busy with a lot of driving, and then we had things to do when we got there, and then we'd be like super tired at bedtime. So I didn't read very much, but that's okay. Some weeks will like that. As far as TV goes, we did finish Reservation Dogs season 2. So good. And the last episode was just really touching and perfect. I mean, just the show is just. And then the baking show is kind of going along. There's a new one today. I haven't seen it yet. And then what I'm really obsessed with still is Better Call Saul. We're in season 4 now, and I mean, we just have to like restrain ourselves. We watch like 2 episodes and a night, and we don't want to sit and watch TV all night. So we like watch one, and then we go read or do something, and then we come back and watch another one. So eventually, I'm gonna hit a wall because I don't think season 6 is on Netflix yet. Like it only goes up through 5, so at some point we're gonna get left hanging, but worry about that when we get there. All right, so the reading. I finished Telephone, and I have a few thoughts. So I did love this book, but it was tough. This book is it's sad, it's dark, but it's really really good. So, but you need to be in a good frame of mind to read this because there's a lot of issues in this book that are either they might be directly in the plot or just sort of in the mix of topics and conversation to different degrees. But there's a lot of things that some people at different times don't want to read about. So, we have a child with a terminal illness, we have dementia, suicide, euthanasia, just different things like that come up in people's thoughts or discussions. And so, and human trafficking. I mean, there's just a lot of serious topics in the book, and I don't want to do a lot of spoilers, but just to let you know, so that you're not blindsided by, you read The Trees and it was like serious topics, but it was kind of funny. This is not funny. This is just serious topics, and it's serious. But it's very, very good. And what's interesting, what's really fascinating to me is that the book was published with 3 different versions. And you can tell which version you got if you look at the compass in this circle. The compass will be pointing in a different direction for the 3 different versions. And so I think, and then also I think he changed the order of the dedication. I don't know, that might be too small to see. But this says for Miles and Henry, and then in another version it says Henry and Miles, and in a third one it says to my sons. So I had to do some research, and I found somebody who had put a graphic of the 3 versions and the variations, and they start pretty subtly where there's some word choice differences or part of a sentence is phrased differently, but it doesn't really affect the meaning. And then progressively there's 3 points in the book where it really diverges. There's something that happens during the family's trip to Paris. There's something that happens in a hospital, and then the 3 endings are totally different endings. So the overall, I think that just based on what I saw about the alternate paths and endings, your feeling coming away from the book could be quite different from mine if you got these different versions. Now, why he did that, I don't completely know, and whether or not it relates to the title is also a question. Now, I have there's 2 different lines of thought that I want to share about the title. So I have an interpretation that I got, but then I read an interesting article, and if I can find it again, I'll put it in the description box, that had a different take on the meaning of the title. So I thought about the title because, you know, when I first picked up this book, I'll be honest, like when I first picked it up in the store, I didn't look at it super closely, and my first impression was that it was three like flip phones, and then I'm like, well, that's not phones, those are compasses. And compass would actually be an appropriate title because there's a geologist, there's some scenes where people are kind of out in the there's a camping part, and there's some other parts where he's kind of like out in fields and things like that. I'm like, well, you know, there's literal compasses, moral compasses, ethical compasses kind of in this book. But that's not the title, it's telephone. So I thought about the different times when Zach Wells, the main character, was on the phone in the book. and at first I thought, well, none of these seem like particularly earth-shaking telephone calls, but they do kind of illustrate, like, he's on the phone a lot with his wife, and they don't communicate well. They're growing apart. It's bringing the situation with their daughter who is ill is bringing to light a weakness in their marriage, and the fact that really that their daughter is the glue that's holding them together, but she's kind of drifting away. And so some of these conversations, they're misunderstanding each other, or they're unsatisfied with each other, or he's not being truthful about where he is or what he's doing. So there's that. And then also it gets up, there's a certain conversation, a telephone call near the end of the book in my version that I think is really significant, because I'm going to explain this in a spoiler-free manner, but he calls somebody and asks for something. And what that person's decision is really does hinge how the book will conclude, whether it will conclude well or disastrously for some people involved. So I think that telephone call is really significant in the story, and maybe that has something to do with the title, that because that it all gets into what people's decisions, and there's what you should do or what you need to do versus what would be the easiest thing to do, or the safest thing to do. And so there's a kind of a call to courage that's going on in part of the story. So I think that for those reasons, I can see why he would choose the name telephone. Now, I read a really interesting, different interpretation from another reader who thought about the game telephone, where, you say something and it goes along through all the people, and by the time you get to the end, it's totally different. And this reader thought that three different versions, where it began with small differences and then the differences grow until you have totally three different outcomes. She thought that was about the game of telephone, and how life is like that, where you are trying to communicate, but the next person hears it differently and interprets it differently, and it goes along and it just changes along the way, and you don't know what's going to happen. So I think that is another valid way of looking at it. So like I said, I'm going to try to find that article again and link it, so if you want to read it and think about it, but don't read it until after. If you're going to read the book, don't look at any of that till you read it, because they talk pretty openly about the different endings and everything. All right, but anyway, very good book, dark and sad material, but he just does not fall into, he doesn't feel bound by sticking to a certain genre or anything like that. Everett's really interesting because, like, this book, 2/3 of this book are kind of a pretty slow paced and kind of a sad evolution of a marriage at the seams and a terrible health crisis with their child, and then there's problems at work, and then all of a sudden in the last third of it, it's sort of an adventure story, and there's action and suspense, so you just don't know what you're going to get. So now I'm left once again thinking I need to read some more Percival Everett. Okay, so then the next book I read was also very fast-paced, Denise Maya's Confidence. Now, I talked about Denise Maya in a previous video about mystery books and authors that I really like. And if you are not familiar with Denise Maya, I do recommend her if you like a good mystery or suspense novel that is a cut above in literary quality than, just the ones that you just go through, and there's 50 books in the series. If you like to read one that's a little more complicated, might diverge from the formula, things like that, then this would be one. If you like Tana French, I think you probably like Denise Maya. So she has she has some standalones, and then she has a few collections. So they're kind of, if you see here, so the Alex Morrow books are excellent. The Patty Meehan books are good as well. Most of the standalones are really good. One of them, I think it might have been Deception, that I wasn't that crazy about. And I think I might have read the Garnet Hill ones like a million years ago. I think they're probably from the 90s, but I can't remember enough to recommend them. But definitely these recent ones and the Alex Morrow I would strongly recommend, and also the Patty Meehan. The last two books, these aren't her last two books, but these two books are connected, which are Conviction and Confidence. These two books have to do with Finn and Anna, who start a podcast, a true crime podcast. And in the first book, it has to do with some events in Anna's past. And she teams up with a neighbor. The backstory is her husband and her neighbor's husband run off together. And I'm not explaining this very well. Anna hears a podcast, and she realizes that she knows the people in the podcast, and she has a secret past that she left behind, and she has a different identity. But she hears some things that relate to her former life on the same day that her husband leaves her with her best friend and neighbor. And then the neighbor's husband comes over, and he's a big basket case. Somehow they team up, and they go off to solve a crime, and they start a podcast. So in this book, it starts out where she has put together a family vacation with all this blended family, and nobody's having a good time because the weather is miserable. And Finn, who is her podcast partner, has brought along his miserable girlfriend who upsets everybody and says all kinds of antagonizing things. So Anna decides to just leave because she hears something juicy that she wants to explore for the podcast. Finn jumps in the car with her. So they just take off and ditch the family vacation. And they go off to investigate a missing young woman who she does this thing called like ex-urban exploring, where she goes into like abandoned houses and films what's in there and puts it on YouTube. And she does a film where she goes into this old chateau, and she walks around, and she finds a secret room. And in the secret room, there are a bunch of what appear to be priceless artifacts. And she's filming them and kind of going, oh my gosh, what is this? And then after this thing was aired, she has disappeared. And then it has to do with that, and a priceless casket, stolen art, forgeries, con artists. There's all kinds of stuff that is going on, and the pace just keeps going. It doesn't slow down. You think, what are these people eating or sleeping? It just goes and goes and goes. But it's very fun, and if you like that kind of book, if any of that sounds good to you, I recommend it. So that was a good one that I sort of, inhaled it real fast. Then we were going on the trip. Now what happened was I had like 20 something pages or something left of this book. I didn't want to haul this whole book with me just to read the ending. So I set it aside, and I brought 3 Men on a Boat. It was one of my Victober selections, and it's just this little skinny book. So I thought, well, I'll just read this book for a couple days, and then I'll go back and finish Confidence. I think I kept calling this Conviction, but this one's Confidence. But sadly, this turned out to be a DNF. So I read it for a couple of days, and I never got past the first few chapters. Now, what I was expecting was that it was sort of light and fluffy and funny and kind of this goofy adventure of these guys that decide to ride in a boat down the River Thames. And really, it just wasn't, it didn't move. Like it was really just this one guy who's supposed to be telling the story of the trip, but he just constantly is on a side thing. Like he'll be like, okay, so now we're packing for the trip. And it starts to get funny about how they're trying to fit all this stuff in the boat, but he keeps stopping and remembering, oh, that reminds me of my weird uncle and how hard it was for him to hang a painting on the wall. And oh, that reminds me of this time when, all the food got soggy. And like it's just a constant side trail. And the side trails aren't that funny. So the funny wasn't funny enough. The plot wasn't plotty enough. And I couldn't get going with it. So it could have been me because I was really tired and there was some distracting things going on. But it did not perform the job that I asked it to do at that time. And so for those reasons, it was out. But, if anyone has read this, you can let me know if I'm being unduly harsh and I should try again. Then, so last night I bailed on 3 Men in a Boat, and I decided to go ahead with my reread plan of The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. And there was barely any time, but I did read, I think I read like the first 5 pages. So I already know that I like this book, so it would be deeply disappointing if I suddenly did not. So I'm going to read The Moonstone this weekend, and I will comment upon it next week. I have not read this in many years, really a long time. So I sort of know the story, but I don't remember all the details or all the characters. So far I only have read the very beginning, which is like the backstory of the Moonstone and why it is cursed. So that is what I read. Checking my little cheat sheet of things I want to remember to talk about. I think that's everything. My next video I'm going to do one of my October content ones. So it'll either be books with ghosts in them or the scariest books I ever read. So I just kind of decide which one, and then I'll do the other one next week. But right now we're getting ready. My daughter's coming today to spend the weekend with us, and so we'll do some fun stuff, and I will be back again on Tuesday for something October-ish. So I hope you have a great weekend in reading. Let me know what you think about any of these books or other things that you have going on, and I hope you have an excellent weekend. Thanks. Bye.